I want to tell you something I did not tell you in 1947. Not because I was hiding it, because in 1947 I was still working out what I had seen and what it meant, and whether I was the right person to say it. In 1947, I talked about televisors and gramophones and penicillin and Charlie Parker. All of that was true. All of that mattered. This also matters. This is the series I have been putting off. The city I described in 1947, the jazz clubs and the bakeries and the automat and the oyster bar and the streets of Harlem and the pushcart on the corner of Orchard and Delancey. That city was also, simultaneously, a city that was substantially organized and taxed and managed by criminal enterprises for decades, openly, with the cooperation of the police and the courts and the political machine and the business community. Not in the shadows, on the street. I grew up in it. I want to tell you what I saw, and I want to tell you what I felt. Because the feelings are part of the story in a way that I have learned, at 44, not to edit out. On January 17, 1920, the 18th Amendment to the United States Constitution went into effect. The 18th Amendment prohibited the manufacture, sale, and transportation of intoxicating liquors within the United States. I was 4 years old. I do not remember January 17, 1920. What I remember, beginning from approximately 1924, when I was 8 years old, when memory becomes reliable, is the world that the 18th Amendment produced. Not the world it intended to produce, the world it actually produced. Let me describe what the 18th Amendment intended. The temperance movement, which had been building for decades before Prohibition, was driven by a genuine and not entirely unreasonable concern. Alcohol consumption in late 19th and early 20th century America was genuinely high by any historical measure. The saloon was a specific institution of working-class male social life that was, by many contemporary accounts, genuinely destructive. Men spending wages on drink, domestic violence facilitated by alcohol, families destabilized by alcoholism. The reformers who pushed for Prohibition believed, in good faith, with genuine moral conviction, that removing alcohol from American life would reduce poverty, reduce domestic violence, reduce crime, improve public health, strengthen families. These were not stupid people. These were not malicious people. They were wrong. But the specific way in which they were wrong is worth understanding carefully, because the wrongness was not random. The wrongness followed from something specific, a failure to understand what happens when you make something illegal that a significant portion of the population wants and will continue to want. The 18th Amendment prohibited intoxicating liquors, but did not define them or specify enforcement. The Volstead Act, passed in October 1919, before the amendment took effect, provided the specifics. The Volstead Act defined intoxicating liquors as any beverage containing more than 0.5% alcohol. This included beer, wine, and spirits. It also included, and this caused immediate outrage, home-brewed beer and homemade wine, which had been common domestic practice across immigrant communities for generations. What the Volstead Act permitted: alcohol for medicinal purposes, prescribed by a physician; alcohol for religious purposes, sacramental wine; alcohol for industrial purposes, existing private stocks purchased before Prohibition took effect. The medicinal exception immediately produced a specific phenomenon. The number of physician prescriptions for whiskey increased from approximately 1 million per year to approximately 11 million per year within the first 2 years of Prohibition. 11 million prescriptions for medicinal whiskey. This is what economists call revealed preference. People said they wanted prohibition. Their behavior revealed what they actually wanted. The religious exception produced a similar result. The number of rabbis and ministers registered to provide sacramental wine increased dramatically. Grape concentrate, sold for home winemaking, labeled with the specific instruction, "Do not add yeast or fermentation will occur," became a significant industry. The label that said, "Do not do this," was, for the consumer, an instruction on how to do it. I want to give you numbers before I give you stories, because the numbers are the structure inside which the stories make sense. Alcohol consumption in the United States during Prohibition. In the first years of Prohibition, 1920 to 1922, alcohol consumption did decline significantly. The reformers were right that the law would reduce consumption. They were wrong about how much, and they were wrong about for how long. By 1925, alcohol consumption had recovered to approximately 70% of pre-Prohibition levels. By 1930, by some estimates, it had recovered to approximately 100% of pre-Prohibition levels, and the alcohol now consumed was produced without any regulatory oversight by criminal enterprises and was often genuinely dangerous. Methanol poisoning, wood alcohol accidentally introduced into bootleg liquor, either through poor distillation or deliberate adulteration, killed approximately 10,000 Americans during Prohibition. Not from alcohol itself, from the unregulated production of alcohol. The government was aware of this. The government, specifically the Treasury Department's enforcement arm, actually added more poison to industrial alcohol to discourage its diversion into bootleg liquor. Making the industrial alcohol more toxic was deliberate policy. This is the government of the United States deliberately poisoning its citizens to enforce a law they did not want to comply with. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Other statistics. The number of speakeasies in New York City in 1927, estimated at 30,000. Before Prohibition, New York had approximately 15,000 legal saloons. Prohibition produced twice as many drinking establishments as the legal market had produced. The federal enforcement budget for Prohibition, approximately $5 million per year. The estimated annual revenue of organized crime during Prohibition, $3 billion. The enforcement budget was 0.17% of the criminal revenue. I was 8 years old in 1924. We lived in the West 50s, not far from this coffee shop. My father was in sales, a specific kind of sales that I understood later to be more connected to the informal economy than I knew at the time. My mother was what mothers were in 1924, present in the apartment, managing the household, managing us. The neighborhood. There was a shop on the corner of our block that sold candy and newspapers and had a back room. I knew there was a back room because I had seen the door, and I had seen men go through the door. And I had noticed that the men who went through the door did not come out the front with candy or newspapers. I asked my mother what was in the back room. She said, "Supplies." I was 8 years old. I believed her. There were other things I noticed and did not understand. The men who stood on certain corners, not selling anything visible, not moving, standing with the specific stillness of people who were present for a purpose that was not casual. The police officer on our block who stopped by the candy shop regularly, not to buy candy. He went in, he stayed a few minutes, he came out. My mother nodded at him when he passed. He nodded back. The trucks that came at night. I sometimes woke to the sound of a truck on the street and looked out the window and saw men unloading things from a truck into the basement of a building. Boxes, moving quickly. The specific quality of people who wanted to be done before the neighborhood fully woke. I did not know what was in the boxes. I was 8 years old. I know now. I want to explain precisely why Prohibition created organized crime rather than reducing crime. Before Prohibition, alcohol was a legal industry. The saloon owner, the brewery, the distillery, these were legal businesses operating in a competitive market. The profit margin on legal alcohol, while healthy, was constrained by competition. You could not charge more than the saloon across the street. After Prohibition, alcohol became an illegal product. An illegal product sold in a competitive market does not behave like a legal product. The specific economics of illegal markets are different from legal markets in ways that are now well understood by economists, but were not well understood in 1920. First, the risk premium. Producing and selling an illegal product carries risks: arrest, imprisonment, confiscation, that legal production does not carry. The producer of illegal alcohol must be compensated for these risks through a higher price. The price of bootleg liquor was approximately 3 to 5 times the pre-prohibition price of legal liquor. The risk premium made bootlegging extraordinarily profitable. Second, enforcement creates scarcity, which increases price. Every time federal agents destroyed a still or confiscated a shipment, the supply of alcohol decreased and the price increased. The more effective the enforcement, the higher the price, the higher the profit margin for the remaining producers. This is the specific perversity of prohibition economics. Effective enforcement makes the illegal trade more profitable. Third, violence replaces legal dispute resolution. In a legal market, business disputes are resolved through contracts and courts. You can sue your supplier for non-delivery. You can take a competitor to court for trademark infringement. In an illegal market, none of these mechanisms are available. The only mechanisms for resolving business disputes in an illegal market are negotiation, threat, and violence. The criminal organizations that developed during Prohibition were organizations that were effective at negotiation, threat, and violence. They were selected for these qualities by the environment. The bootlegger who could not defend his territory did not survive. The bootlegger who could defend his territory, and who could make and keep alliances, and who could manage violence as a business tool, thrived. By 1925, the most successful bootleggers in America were not the most entrepreneurial, or the most innovative, or the most charismatic. They were the most organized, and the most willing to use force. This is the organizational template that would persist for decades after Prohibition ended. I want to describe the Speakeasy as a social institution, because it was more than a place to drink. The Speakeasy, the word comes from the instruction given to customers approaching an illegal establishment, speak easy, keep your voice down, was in the 1920s and early 1930s one of the few places in American urban life where social class, race, and gender mixed with relative fluidity. The legal saloon, before Prohibition, had been overwhelmingly a male institution. Women did not go to saloons. Middle-class and upper-class men might drink at clubs or restaurants. The saloon was working-class and male. The speakeasy? Different. Women went to speakeasies. This was partly because the illegality created a specific atmosphere that the legal saloon had not had. The atmosphere of shared transgression, of everyone present being in on the same secret, of the social rules that applied outside somehow not applying inside. Black jazz musicians played in speakeasies where both black and white customers listened. This was not equality. The Harlem clubs that catered to white downtown audiences often employed black musicians for white patrons while excluding black customers. But compared to the rigid segregation of most public spaces in 1920s New York, the speakeasy was, in specific and limited ways, more permeable. I first went to a speakeasy in 1927. I was 11 years old. My cousin Clara, who was 16 and understood the world in ways that I was beginning to understand it, took me. The Speakeasy, a basement on West 46th Street. You knocked on the door. A small window opened. Clara said something I did not hear. A password, I understood later, though I did not know the word then. The door opened. Inside, tables, a bar, people talking. Music from somewhere, a piano, I think. The smell of cigarettes and something sweet and something sharper underneath the sweet. I understood. This was not a restaurant. I did not understand the man at the bar who nodded at the man who collected money, who nodded at the man at the door. The chain of people whose presence and coordination made the room possible. I was 11. I thought it was an adventure. The Speakeasy I visited with Clara in 1927 was able to operate for the same reason that 30,000 speakeasies operated in New York City simultaneously. The police knew. Not all police officers accepted bribes. There were honest officers, then and throughout this period, who did their jobs without corruption. I do not want to slander the entire force, but a speakeasy is a physically fixed location. It has an address. It operates on a schedule. It admits customers through a door. These are not the characteristics of a business that can hide effectively from law enforcement that is trying to find it. The 30,000 speakeasies of 1920s New York were not hidden from the police. They were hidden from federal enforcement with the cooperation of local police. The specific mechanism? Speakeasy operators paid regular fees to police officers, precinct captains, and in some cases higher officials. These fees, called ice in the parlance of the time, were not irregular bribes for specific services. They were regular payments, on a schedule, for ongoing protection. A typical speakeasy in mid-1920s Manhattan paid approximately $150 per month to the local police captain, $75 per month to the beat officer, variable amounts upward through the political structure. These were not small amounts. $150 per month in 1925 is approximately $2,500 in current terms. The aggregate corruption payments flowing through the New York City Police Department from speakeasies alone, at the peak of Prohibition, estimated at millions of dollars per year. A 1929 investigation, the Seabury Commission, which I will describe in more detail in the politics episode, found that virtually every precinct in Manhattan had a systematic corruption structure. Not exceptional officers who had gone wrong. A system.